There are places where legends seem to settle into the landscape itself. Places where the air feels heavy with memory. Where stories linger long after the people at the center of them are gone. Along the southern edge of Lake Michigan, near the dunes of Indiana, there is one such story. For generations, fishermen and locals spoke of a woman seen moving along the shoreline at dusk. Sometimes she was swimming far out in the cold waters of the lake. Sometimes she was running barefoot across the sand. And sometimes, just as someone approached close enough to call out to her, she vanished. People called her Diana of the Dunes. A mysterious beauty living alone among the sandhills near Chesterton, Indiana. A woman who seemed almost separate from the modern world around her. To some, she was romantic and tragic. To others, she was strange, rebellious, and unsettling. Newspapers turned her into a curiosity. Locals turned her into folklore. But behind the legend was a real woman. A woman named Alice Mabel Gray. And the truth of her story is far more heartbreaking than the ghost tales that followed her death. She was brilliant, educated, independent. A scholar who walked away from society to live beside the lake she loved. And yet, over time, the peaceful isolation she sought became entangled with violence, suspicion, illness, and tragedy. Until eventually, the woman known as Diana of the Dunes became a ghost story herself. Tonight, witches and wanderers, we walk the shores of Lake Michigan, and we meet the spirit called Diana of the Dunes. Hello, and welcome back, witches and wanderers, to the Morbid Witch Podcast, where we explore myths, folklore, legends, hauntings, and the darker stories hidden beneath history and culture. I'm your host, Kari. Each episode, we step into tales that blur the line between truth and legend, examining not only the stories themselves, but the people behind them. Sometimes those stories are ancient myths, passed through generations. Other times they are far more recent, built from memory, tragedy, and the strange way communities transform real lives into folklore. Tonight's episode is one of those stories, because Diana of the Dunes was real. The beaches existed, the cabin existed, the rumors existed. And somewhere between fact and local legend, Alice Gray became something larger than life. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're returning, it's always good to have you back. To all my witches and wanderers, thank you for being here and continuing to support the show. Every listen, every comment, every rating, and every message helps keep this little corner of darkness alive. I truly appreciate every one of you who spends your time here with me. Before we begin, just a quick reminder. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment, sharing your thoughts. And if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to rate the show. It really helps more witches and wanderers find their way to the podcast. You can listen to the Morbid Witch Podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Pandora. Now, let's step into the dunes. Before she became known as Diana of the Dunes, she was simply Alice Mabel Gray. She was born in Chicago in 1881 into a working-class family. Her father worked as a laborer, and Alice grew up alongside 3 brothers and 2 sisters. From an early age, she stood out academically. She was intelligent, curious, and deeply driven. And in a time when higher education was still difficult for many women to access, Alice pursued it relentlessly. At only 16 years old, she entered the University of Chicago in 1897. Even among other students, she distinguished herself. She graduated in 1903 with a bachelor's degree and earned honorable mentions in astronomy, mathematics, Greek, and Latin. She also became a member of the prestigious Phi Beta Kappa Society. These accomplishments were remarkable, especially for a woman living at the turn of the 20th century. Alice Gray was not eccentric or isolated at this point in her life. She was ambitious and exceptionally intelligent. After graduation, Alice worked for the United States Naval Observatory. Her interest in science and mathematics continued to shape her career, and she pursued further education both at the University of Göttingen in Germany and later through graduate courses at the University of Chicago. She also worked as a stenographer at the university. By all outward appearances, Alice had the foundation for a stable and respected academic life. But internally, something was beginning to shift. Over time, Alice became increasingly dissatisfied with the structure of her life. The routines of work, the expectations of society, and the pressure of urban life began to wear on her. There are also accounts suggesting that she feared losing her eyesight, something that deeply frightened her given how much of her identity was tied to reading and study. And slowly, the world she had worked so hard to enter began to feel suffocating rather than fulfilling. In October of 1915, Alice made a decision that shocked many people around her. She left Chicago, not for another city, not for marriage or opportunity, but for the dunes. She traveled to the isolated dune country of northwestern Indiana and settled near the beaches of Lake Michigan. There, among the shifting sands and tall grasses, she began an entirely different life, and it was there that the legend truly began. For the first 5 years of her life on the dunes, Alice lived almost entirely alone. She moved into an abandoned shack near the shoreline that she named Driftwood. The cabin was simple, weathered, and isolated from most nearby communities. To many people, the idea of a woman willingly living alone in such conditions seemed unbelievable. But for Alice, the dunes represented freedom. They offered silence, distance, and space away from the pressure she had left behind. Locals soon began noticing her wandering the beaches and swimming in Lake Michigan. She was often seen barefoot, dressed simply, moving through the dunes as though she belonged to them. Because few people knew her real identity, stories began to spread. Some described her as mysterious and beautiful. Others portrayed her as strange or unstable. Eventually, locals started calling her Diana of the Dunes, comparing her to Diana, the Roman goddess of wilderness and the hunt. The nickname transformed Alice into something almost mythological while she was still alive. Newspapers became fascinated with her story, often sensationalizing her lifestyle. Articles painted her as a mysterious hermit woman living beyond civilization. Some romanticized her isolation as noble and poetic, while others treated her as an oddity. Very little attention was paid to her intelligence or academic accomplishments. Instead, she became a spectacle. But Alice herself seemed deeply connected to the dunes. She studied nature, walked the beaches endlessly, and immersed herself in the rhythms of the landscape. There was something deeply personal about her attachment to the area. The dunes offered her a sense of peace she had not found elsewhere. And for a while, despite the rumors and attention, she appeared content. Yet isolation can be fragile, and eventually, another person entered her world. A man whose arrival would change the course of her life completely. Around 1920 or 1921, Alice began a relationship with a man named Paul Wilson. Very little is known about his early life, which only added to the mystery surrounding him. Locals described him as tall, rough, and prone to violence. He worked as a boatwright, though employment was inconsistent, and rumors followed him almost immediately. Where Alice had once been viewed as unusual but peaceful, Wilson brought tension and fear into the dunes. At first, the two shared Alice's cabin, Driftwood, but eventually they moved to another shack called Wren's Nest, located farther west in Ogden Dunes. The move placed them deeper into isolation, and as time passed, reports of Wilson's temper became more common. People described him as combative and unpredictable. Arguments between the couple were reportedly frequent, and Alice's once solitary, peaceful existence became increasingly unstable. Then, in 1922, the situation became even darker. A man's body was discovered near Wren's Nest. Wilson quickly became a suspect in the murder investigation. Around the same time, Deputy Sheriff Eugene Frank accused both Wilson and Alice of stealing fish and robbing cottages throughout the dunes area. Whether these accusations were true remains unclear, but tensions escalated rapidly. Eventually, Wilson and Alice confronted Frank directly. The confrontation turned violent. Wilson was shot in the foot during the altercation, while Alice suffered a skull fracture. Frank himself was charged with assault, but the case eventually collapsed after Alice and Wilson failed to appear in court. Wilson was later cleared in connection to the murder, though the case itself was never solved. And as these events unfolded, the public image of Diana of the Dunes changed dramatically. No longer was she simply the beautiful hermit of local legend. Now she was connected to violence, crime, and scandal, and the dunes themselves began to feel darker. Before we continue Witches and Wanderers, let's pause for just a moment. Thank you for being here and spending your time with the Morbid Witch Podcast. Whether you're listening late at night, driving, relaxing, or somewhere in between, I appreciate every single one of you. This podcast continues to grow because of your support, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I always love hearing your thoughts on theories. And if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to rate the show. You can listen to the Morbid Witch Podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Pandora. Now, let's return to the dunes. By the early months of 1925, Alice Gray's health had begun to fail. Years of hardship, stress, and isolation had taken a visible toll on her body. Reports from the time describe her as increasingly weak and ill. Eventually, she developed kidney failure, a condition that would become fatal without proper medical care. Friends and locals urged her to seek treatment, but Alice refused hospitalization. There are many theories as to why she resisted medical help. Some believe she distrusted institutions and preferred the independence she had built on the dunes. Others think she simply wanted to remain in the place she loved most during her final days. Whatever the reason, she stayed at Ogden Dunes as her condition worsened, and Paul Wilson remained with her through the decline. Rumors quickly spread after her death. Some believe Wilson had poisoned her. Others pointed to the turbulent nature of their relationship and his violent reputation. Officially, Alice died of uremic poisoning, related to kidney failure on February 8, 1925. But in folklore, official explanations rarely settle public imagination. The mystery surrounding Wilson, combined with Alice's tragic life, fueled speculation for decades afterwards. She was buried at Oak Lawn Cemetery in Gary, Indiana. And with her burial, the woman disappeared. But the legend did not. Not long after Alice's death, stories began circulating about strange sightings near the dunes. Fishermen claimed they saw a woman swimming far out in Lake Michigan, even during dangerous weather. Others described a figure running barefoot across the shoreline before vanishing into the mist. Sometimes she appeared near the water. Other times she was seen among the dunes themselves, moving silently through the tall grass. Locals connected these sightings directly to Alice Gray. To them, Diana of the Dunes had never truly left the beaches she loved. The ghost stories transformed her once again, from a living legend into something spectral. And over time, the details became blurred together. The real Alice Gray and the phantom Diana became almost impossible to separate. What makes this legend endure is not simply the haunting itself, it's the emotional weight behind it. Alice's story carries loneliness, brilliance, tragedy, and longing. She walked away from society, searching for peace and freedom, only to become trapped with another kind of isolation. And because of that, the idea of her spirit returning to the dunes feels strangely believable to many people. There's also something haunting about the image itself. A lone woman moving through fog beside Lake Michigan, appearing for only a moment before disappearing back into the water. It feels less like a horror story and more like grief refusing to leave a place behind. Today, Alice Gray remains one of Indiana's most enduring local legends. Historians, folklorists, and paranormal enthusiasts continue to revisit her story, trying to separate fact from embellishment. Yet, even with modern research, the emotional core of the legend remains unchanged. People are still drawn to Diana of the Dunes because her story feels deeply human. She was intelligent, isolated, unconventional, and ultimately tragic. The dunes themselves also play a major role in the legend's endurance. The landscape around Lake Michigan carries a strange beauty, quiet, shifting, and almost dreamlike at times. It is easy to understand how someone could disappear into that environment, both physically and emotionally. And it is equally easy to understand how ghost stories would grow there. Places like that tend to hold on to memory. Whether people truly believe her spirit walks the shoreline or not, Alice Gray has become inseparable from the dunes. Her life transformed into folklore while she was still alive, and death only deepened the mythology surrounding her. In many ways, Diana of the Dunes represents the thin line between reality and legend. A real woman became a story, and that story became something immortal. Thank you for listening to the Morbid Witch Podcast, and thank you to all my witches and wanderers for continuing to support the show. Every listen, Every rating, every comment, and every share helps keep these stories alive. I truly appreciate every one of you who spends your time here with me. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, make sure you're following the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Pandora. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to rate the show. Until next time, stay strange, stay spooky, and remember, the shadows are always watching.